Basically, here in Asia, you can try, you can fail, and yet you can succeed. Whereas in Europe, the failure is less accepted. We are a bank, so we know what it is to take risks, right? And the risks that is at stakes in Europe is much more difficult to take than here.
Welcome to the French Tech Asia Pacific podcast. I'm your host, Nikolai. And for this very first episode, I'd like to start off with just a little bit of housekeeping. I have a couple of exciting announcements for you. This season we'll be publishing a lot more content and we'll be trying out a couple of new formats. One of the things we're experimenting with is live audience recordings. We have our very first event coming up here in Singapore on October 10th, which will be a live audience moderated panel discussion on the future of work and learning in the age of artificial intelligence. We'll also be doing event coverage, and we'll be kicking off with the Women's Forum that's held here in Singapore next week, where we'll be interviewing some of the amazing speakers from what promises to be a very exciting event, and some of that content will also be broadcasted live on YouTube. So stay tuned for announcements about that on our LinkedIn page or here directly on the podcast. We also have a couple of special series coming up, where we will be exploring particular topics, and we have a first one that's going to be launched next week that's going to deal with marketing, digital marketing and sales. And each week we'll be taking a closer look at a marketing campaign, idea or strategy from here in Southeast Asia that we really like and that we think might be valuable for other entrepreneurs, whether they're from the West trying to come to Asia or whether they're already here in Asia and trying to make their business grow here. That's it for the housekeeping, so let's get started with this very first episode of Season 2. For this episode, we flew to a city that's been in the news quite a lot recently, Hong Kong. We met up there with Elvie Lahournère, Director of Digital and Innovation at Natixis Bank, to talk about the way Natixis drives digital innovation. We explored the many contrasts between the East and the West when it comes to entrepreneurial attitude, risk-taking, speed of execution, as well as the differences in the way startups and big corporations work together.
My name is Elvie Lahournère. I work for Natixis as the head of Digital and Innovation for APAC. But previously, I used to say that I have 7 years of different life. Before at Airbus, and then for a strategic consulting firm in China. And I think it's interesting in a sense that it shows that in Natixis, innovation and digital starts with differences. And that's what I'm doing here. Basically, my role here in Natixis is to create, to differentiate our value proposition through digital and through innovation. Although I work for a bank, I'm not a banker.
You work in banking, but you're not a banker. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, I would say if you're in front of us, it would be a disadvantage, right? But to run a digital and innovation practice, I think it's an advantage. The reasons why is because basically what is my routine is to think out of the box. And let's see, if you see the bank with the same eyes as everybody, then it's quite difficult to see differences, right? Whereas if you have, let's say, a fresh new eyes, I would say it's just much more obvious. For instance, when I first arrived in Natixis, instead of asking myself what the other competitors are doing, I ask what Intel is doing. And that's basically how I started building the strategy here in APAC. Not only within the competition and within the sector, but also thinking about how the other industries are actually going through this digital transformation.
So if you had to pinpoint one thing that you saw differently because of your background, what would it be?
Probably the, let's say, process efficiency. I would say that if you think, for instance, to a workshop, we are very focusing on automation, right? And I'd like to see that here in a bank, this has been done for front office tasks and a lot of global market tasks. However, when we think about tasks such as in compliance or more legal part, there is still a lot to do. So I would say that it is one of things that strikes me the most when I arrived.
Is there a lot of opportunity still in terms of legal, for example, in the legal space for automation, for process optimization?
I would say not only for process optimization, but also for working with solutions that can really enhance the day-to-day. For an example, today, if you have a change in regulation, not only you have to understand the change, but also you have to understand the impact of the change in your operations. And more startups are working on automate this and being able to deliver just a smart solution, which will not only release let's say, the time and the pressure, but also, and I think this is the most important, decrease our operational risks.
Before getting into the question of startups that operate within this space and the way that they might potentially compete with you, let's bring it back to your customer first. Everybody's always talking about the digital revolution and about the way that digital revolution has changed expectations and behavior of customers. In what way has it impacted your customers, and what have been the opportunities and the challenges that those changes have generated for Natixis?
Yes, the customer has changed tremendously for two main reasons. Today we are in a world where customer not only wants to have a solution, but what's matter is not only the end product, but also the journey all along the value chain. And for us, it completely changed the way we are working, because it's not only about the solution we deliver, but it's also how we are going to deliver, by which touch of contact we will be with the customer. And so that means that in terms of how we interface with the customer, in Natixis we are really thinking in a customer-centric way. But when we say this, we are not only related to front office function. It's all along the value chain. From the legal compliance up to the IT, everybody has focused on the customer, and I think this is really what has changed in the recent years. Because let's face it, being the best in class is not enough. What we need to do is to exceed our customer expectation, and especially the digital native one, because they are expecting to somehow to be able to get what they want before they already know that they want it.
Is that an opportunity or a challenge for you, or both?
I would say it's both, especially here in Asia. It's both because it's an opportunity, because this digital native customer, especially, they are eager to change. So basically, as long as we have the expertise, we have the right way of delivering the right solution at the right time, then it's easy for us, or it's an opportunity for us to get new customers. But at the same time, it's a challenge, because we need to stay ahead.
So we're recording this here in your Hong Kong office. Could you talk about the differences between the expectations of customers here in Asia versus France, for example?
First of all, in Hong Kong, this is completely different to France. And even more, I would say, in China, our main line, it's even more different than France. Probably the scalability, there's a first. Let's face it, if you take 1.4 billion inhabitants versus 68 inhabitants, you cannot serve the same way the two bunch of people. But more interestingly, I would say in terms of culture, there is in Asia, and that's where startups also, and for my part, it becomes quite crispy, because basically here in Asia, it's quite easy to try out, to fail and try again. Whereas in France, we still are quite conservative. And I would say in terms of how we engage us as a bank with the startups, then it's probably more easier here than in France.
You mentioned that it's easier here to try, fail, and try again. Why is that?
Culture mindset. Definitely culture mindset. I used to live in Beijing for 5 years, and basically, if you're an entrepreneur in Beijing and you didn't fail once, then you will never raise any money.
Could this be a feature of a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem, that people, even though there is a high risk of failure, the only thing they really care about is the success?
Exactly. It's completely real features of what we call the virtual circle. Basically, here in Asia, you can try, you can fail, and yet you can succeed. Whereas in Europe, it's much more, the failure is less accepted. And so the risks, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of risk. And I mean, we are a bank, so we know what it is to take risk, right? And the risks that is at stakes in Europe is much more difficult to take than here.
Let's talk a little bit about that relationship between you as a bank and startups. On your LinkedIn profile, you mentioned that you strongly believe that large corporations and startups will benefit from mutual partnership. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. It's kind of the best of the two worlds. Basically, here we have in Natixis the infrastructure, the data. We also have the processes. And on the other way, we have the startup world where basically there is the flexibility, the agility, the out-of-the-box somehow thinking. And my belief is if you mix these two words in the right way, which is not easy, then you can create the magic recipes, because basically our intention is to bring the value that can be created probably through a better technology, but at the same time taking into account our legacy, our processes. And I think that is the beauty of it, because basically right now, these two words, if you take, they were competing 10 years ago. They were completely competing. And I even remember when I was in the R&D center of Airbus, thinking about taking a startup to Innovate 10 years ago was not at all in the picture. And the same Airbus has opened an engineering center in Shenzhen last year. And for Natixis is the same. Now we are really in a cooperation mode. We have taken participation in startups in France, and what now we are trying to put in place is the right way to work with them hand to hand, which is not easy because, again, flexibility, agility versus processes. It doesn't have to be versus, it has to be together, and this together has to be created.
Right, so you have to find ways to create synergistic relationships between startups and the banks.
You don't want to kill it. You don't want to kill it. You don't want the big fish to eat the small fish, and at the same time, you don't want the small fish completely change the face of the big fish. This is not the idea. Both as really to create something that is a different fish. And that is something that is interesting. That's why I like about my job, and because it's basically a day-to-day work, and it starts from the inside. And most of this job starts from a cultural mindset change within our company.
I've noticed, and other people we've talked to have commented on the fact that the relationships here between startups and corporates and banks is much more positive than it is back in Europe. Back in Europe, for example, in France, startups sort of frown on cooperation with banks in particular, and banks really don't know how to talk to startups. It strikes me that here that relationship is much more positive. Is that maybe because of the sheer scale of the market, because of the speed at which things move here?
I would say it's for two reasons to my understanding. First of all is here, a lot of startups, they don't need money. And that's something that we as a bank need to understand. In Europe, if you are a fintech, you need to raise money, right? Here, if you're in fintech, you need to raise money. However, to find this money, you don't have to rely on corporates. You can go for venture capitals or even business angel. That's Asia style. That's Asia specificities. That's the first differences. Second is the mindset. The mindset is completely different here. And I think the corporate, even for a French bank like Natixis, they really understood the benefit of being, let's say, humble when looking at startups. For instance, for me, we have created here something called Meet the Boss, where we ask startups to come in our premises to showcase not only their solution, but also the journey. And I think probably 5 years ago, no chance this kind of initiatives would have worked. And now it works. It works not only for our employee that really understand the journey from an idea to a business model, to a project and to a product, but also for the startups to also test their product in front of a real crowd. So you see, this works here in Asia. I'm not sure it would work in France or in Europe, much probably because of the openness. Openness is here is already a mantra, whereas in France we are still much more, let's say, looking at each other.
Does that put you at an advantage, being in innovation here versus Europe?
I think it is an advantage to be here, for sure. The reasons is because basically, as we said, it's faster. Go-to-market for startup is faster. We have a better tryout possibilities. But probably because of this, the idea, for instance, for Natixis is to be a lab here. So now we are also launching projects that are technological driven for the group, but starting here in Asia, being kind of a lab here. And one of the reasons is because, yes, we do have the scalability here in terms of customer reaching power, let's make it like this. But also because there is this ecosystem that is a very rich near to us, whether it is here in Hong Kong, in China, or in Singapore.
Could you talk about some of the challenges that you face bringing those insights that you gather here in the lab in Asia back to France or back to global?
Probably, of course, you cannot think that you will develop something that is copy-paste and after will be bring to Paris or London. There is adjustment to do, but the way we structure our project here and the way we drive our innovation and digital initiatives is that we are very inclusive. So from the very beginning, there is no initiative that is starting here that is not being discussed with our headquarters or even the US. And one of the reasons is because 10 brain is better than one. So basically, when we have a good idea, then we discuss with our peers to make this a great idea. And that's really how, and again, this is really the startup. You know, at the very beginning, you were asking me why do I believe that being outside of the bank is an advantage. But this is basically a way of seeing the bigger picture outside of the bank.
So let's bring this back to the internal ecosystem of the bank. You mentioned this initiative that you're running here called Meet the Boss, where you have startup founders talk to your internal employees about their journey, about the solution that they're trying to bring to market. Is that a way for you also to drive cultural change within Natixis? Because, I mean, maybe it's just a preconceived idea I have, but sometimes we could think that corporate culture and innovation and out-of-the-box thinking don't always go hand in hand.
Yes, I think it's a misunderstanding. Basically, I agree with you. There is this misleading conception that when you're in corporate, there is only one way of seeing the picture. And part of my idea is to bring an additional way, or let's say a new way, by bringing the startups. But what I'm amazed is when we discuss here with internal people, they have bright ideas already. The only thing that they need is a way to express it. And this is my job. You know, we have run this Smart and Simple initiative. This Smart and Simple challenge was a worldwide Natixis initiative where we asked our employee to work on ideation challenge in order to foster our operational efficiency. And guess what? 300 projects, 9,000 participants. It is tremendous. It's absolutely sure that if you ask people, they have idea. However, and that's the challenge that we are facing, we need to be able to have the structure to express them. And that's what we are now currently putting in place in the next 6 months. The whole idea is to really empower our employee to be able not only to think about their job on a day-to-day basis, asking themselves, am I doing the right way? Can I do it in a better way? Can I propose or can I suggest something different? But then enabling them to do it. And that's what is most difficult.
That's a very interesting point. I myself have worked in digital innovation for a very large French insurance firm, maybe a little bit more conservative as a firm. And one of the challenges that we were facing was having people express their ideas because they were afraid to raise perhaps stupid ideas or the wrong ideas. And we had to convince people that it was okay to be wrong and to fail. Like very much like you mentioned before, the difference in startup culture, being afraid of failure versus wanting success. Is that also a difference in corporate culture between Asia and France, you think?
I think it is. I think it is already a difference between different corporates. So we all have our DNA. And you know, in Natixis, our DNA is beyond banking. And this beyond means something. Let's face it, we can't say that we are beyond banking and then asking our employee not to think beyond the line. So basically that's really our DNA that is just at the corner, and that's where we are following in our digital and innovation journey. Now, after saying this, we need to enable them to be able not to be afraid. One of the very easiest things that we are doing is workshop. Workshop works. You put people that don't know each other from different departments on one specific topic. You do have idea, and not only idea, you have very interesting and straight to the point idea, an actionable idea. And this we already proven it. Through the Smart and Simple Challenge is one, but we have done it also here to different departments, and it works.
So you're also heavily involved in the French tech ecosystem here, first in Beijing and now here in Hong Kong. How does your connection to the startup ecosystem impact what you're trying to do here at Natixis?
I think it does not impact. It actually completely shape it. It shape it because running a non-profit, you don't have any money. You have to think about one idea, and the minute you have an idea, you have to think about how you're going to finance it and what will be the impact on this. And the way I am running digital innovation here in Natixis APAC is the same, is really in a startup mode. When we come up with a project or an idea, the minute after we're asking ourselves for what benefit, what impact, and how we're going to finance it. So I completely believe that the fact that I used to run, and I'm still running now, a non-profit is really shaping the way I'm doing the job here. Plus, when we discuss with startups, there is a mantra that all the startups, actually it's one of the startups that I like in Shenzhen that told me one day, if you want to stay in life, you have to innovate, iterate, or be obsolete. And you know what? Any presentation that I'm doing here now, the last slide, it's exactly these 3 words. And that's really what we want here, all the employees and all the people that are working on day-to-day in the bank believe it is the way we have to think in order to stay alive. And that's really something that it comes from the startup world. Innovate, iterate, or be obsolete.
That's a perfect place to wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.